Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Savvy Street Show. I'm Roger Bissell, and I'm your moderator for this installment number 5 of our series on libertarian controversies. And this one is going to center on the bedrock principle, really, of libertarianism, which is the non-aggression principle. And if you hear us use the letters NAP, we'll try to enunciate so that you can hear it clearly, but that's what we're referring to, the principle that you should not aggress against other people. To anybody who loves liberty, as the three of us do, there's something really appealing about this principle. It's very clear, very simple. Thou shalt not initiate force. Respect the personal freedom and property of your fellow human beings. We have two guests here tonight who have quite a bit to say about this. Walter Block, the eminent economist and author of the series on defending the undefendable. Yes, I always get that wrong, and I'm very sorry. Defending the undefendable. And my co-host and co-author and editor of The Savvy Street, Vinay Kolhatkar. Welcome to both of you, gentlemen.
Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Good to have you.
Thank you.
Now, the concept of live and let live really captures the non-aggression principle very nicely. Most people, I think, understand that if they blink a little bit when they hear non-aggression principle. Now, we're going to examine tonight whether this principle is enough to have a practical and a strong political philosophy. And we're going to look both at the theory that underlies the principle, and we're also going to look at some of the implications for policy issues. So let's start by defining our terms. We say that we want a society that lives by the principle of non-aggression. We don't want any of this aggression stuff. What is aggression? Is it just being belligerent and violent and unpleasant, engaging in physical attacks on others, or is there something more to it than that? I'd like to hear from Walter first.
Thank you. I think we need one more principle. I've been admiring Vinay's shirt. And what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to go over and grab it. And now the question is, am I a violator of the NAP? Am I a violator of the non-aggression principle? It all depends upon whose shirt that is. If he stole it from me yesterday, I'm just repossessing it, and he's the bad guy, and I'm the good guy. On the other hand, this is the first time I saw the shirt. It's his shirt. It's not mine. So if I grab it, I'm the bad guy. I initiated violence. I initiated aggression. So we really need a theory of private property. And I think also, in addition to the NAP, and I think most libertarians go along with John Locke and Murray Rothbard, who said that we own ourselves. We start off that way, and then we mix our labor with the land, and we own the land. And then I put in a crop, and I have corn, and Vinay captures a cow and domesticates the cow, and he's got milk. And then Robert Nozick said any legitimate title transfer. So now Vinay and I trade. We have a barter, and I now own the milk, even though I didn't produce it, but I can trace it back to his homesteading and the voluntary agreement. And he also has corn, even though he didn't produce that. So I think everything is cool if we have the non-aggression principle and private property rights. And it's not only the initiation, but the threat thereof. I'm now going to threaten you, Roger. I have a gun here. You can see the gun. And I say, give me your money or I'll shoot you. And now it's okay to say that here because, we're just engaging in a philosophical discussion. Or if it was in a play or a movie, that's fine. But if I was serious and I said, here, I've got a gun and I'm going to shoot you, I don't even need a gun. I can say, give me your money or I'll beat you up or something like that. Mainly a threat.
Well, your bullets aren't going to go all the way from where you are to where I am anyway, so I feel like I'm fairly safe.
Well, I've got an ICBM, so if you don't give me money, I'm going to get you, boy. So what I'm saying is that it's not only physical violence, but it's also the threat thereof. And I just wanted to get in a word against antiwar.com. Antiwar.com is a libertarian, wonderful blog But I think it's misnamed because we libertarians are not against war. We're only against offensive or initiatory war. We're not against defensive war. So if somebody attacks us and we fight back, we are engaging in war, but that's okay. And similarly, the Mises Institute has its motto, free enterprise and something else, and peace. Well, we're not in favor of peace. We're not pacifists. If somebody attacks us, we have a right. We need not be pacifists. Some of us could be pacifists, but we don't have to be pacifists in order to be libertarians. So that would be my opening statement on this issue.
All right. How about you, Vinay?
Okay, you asked for a definition, and here it comes. Aggression is the initiation of force or of a threat to use force, or the initiation of deceit, including subtle manipulation, is also deceit. So that's a definition of aggression, and we can go into more detail where all that comes from if we need to. But that's all I'll say. As you know, what we need to avoid is what we call the second order of humaneness in our book on ethics. Roger was, pretty close to this NAP principle.
Well, Vinay, if I say that I really, really like your shirt, am I engaging in aggression if I don't really, really like it?
Not at
Bec-
all. That is a good counter, because NAP at the end of the day is a kind of a core principle, but we have to ask the question, where did this principle come from? And in what circumstances can you depart from the principle? So the first order of the day then is to not so much define as describe and understand the world around us, metaphysics, if you will. And the world around us obeys certain natural laws. And when human beings discover those laws and, engineer things with those laws, so you go from science to technology and engineering, you get quite a lot of prosperity, provided also there's a civilization of division of labor, of just laws and just conduct. And that depends on the nature of human beings. Human beings are naturally curious, they're naturally self-actualizing human beings. So if you ask the question, what does it take for an ethics to be universal, and what does it take to self-actualize? So the answer would be, if everyone was free to self-actualize, make mistakes, correct themselves, the cornerstone principle would be that, yes, you have your own ethics, you're trying to do the best for yourself, but while you're doing it, there is a principle of universalization, that it should allow everyone else to do the same thing. And the only way this can be implemented in society is the lack of aggression as we defined it. But because those principles are based on non-aggression, homesteading are based on the value of life and based on the kind of world we are in, when nature, in fact, is beautiful, but is also hostile to us. And we need to, tame nature. And that's why we have those principles. But there can be instances like the famous instance of Kant, Immanuel Kant. I call it the Kantian killer in order to exaggerate it. So there is a killer who knocks on your door. He does want to kill your daughter, and he asks you where she is. And Immanuel Kant says, well, you should tell him the truth, which is an absurd answer. You should try in every which way to engage in deceit that is successful, so that he doesn't find him. Because after all, he's the one threatening force, and you owe him nothing. And in fact, you owe him a lie. There's another illustration which I explored in a novel. There's, in that case, 19, but let's say a 15-year-old girl, she's depressed. There's nothing wrong with her physically. And she's about to jump off the Millennium Bridge in London right into a freezing Thames River. You are a taxi driver, and this is an actual scene. She's put one leg over the railing, and if she throws herself down, she is going to die. It's just, there's seconds left. There's not enough time to call the cops or the Coast Guard, let alone philosophize. So in this instance, the cabbie runs and hauls her off the railing. She might hurt a foot, have you aggressed? Yes. But the whole nap was built in place to value life and have an ethical and civilized society. And I don't believe any jury in the world would convict the cabbie, because he's done the right thing by saving a life. And in due course, her depression may go, and she may very well thank him for saving her life. Now, it mightn't happen. She might stay depressed and make more attempts, and the third attempt may be successful, unfortunately. But he obviously hasn't done anything wrong, but he's done a lot of good. So
Okay.
that's my answer.
Okay, I want to come back to the question of deceit, because there is an aspect of deceit that I think plays into libertarianism as far as the rights are concerned, and I'd like Walter to come in on this. It's not just initiating force, like physical force, like hurting someone's body or taking their property, but what about fraud? I mean, fraud is definitely you're trying to get some person's material values from them, or to get them to do something that they wouldn't willingly do if they knew the truth, but you've lied to them. So, Walter, do you have any comments about fraud and whether it should be part of the libertarian principles? I mean, I don't mean that it's good. I mean that it's bad.
No, I agree with you. It's akin to theft. I mean,
Yep.
one way I can get uh, the shirt from Vinay is to grab it. Another way is I could engage in fraud. Somehow I tell them I'm going to buy it, and then I just don't send them the money. And
Yep.
it's the same thing. It would be indistinguishable from a libertarian point of view whether I stole his shirt by grabbing it off his body or off his closet, or I said I'll buy it for $100 and he agreed, and he sends it to me and I just don't send him the $100. It
Yep.
doesn't matter. It's all the same thing. On
Yep.
the other hand, we don't owe each other the truth. If you ask me what time it is and I say it's 17:00, I lied. But it's not a violation of rights because I have free speech. Now, if you hired me to tell you the time and then you asked me the time and I purposely lied, now I'm engaging in fraud against you. So I think we have to distinguish between telling the truth, which you're not required to do. Certainly, Vinay's point about you don't have to tell the murderer where your daughter is. But I wanted to comment on Vinay's point about the girl playing suicide. In the process of committing suicide, I have a problem. It's a 15-year-old girl. Well, she's a child. So I don't care. You just grab her and keep her. And when you do that, you're not invading her or anything like that. On the other hand, if she's 25 years old and you grab her and she says, look, I have stage 5 cancer and it's excruciating and the morphine no longer works. And I'm just in diabolical pain all the time. And I appreciate, that you stopped me because you didn't know. And I'm not going to sue you for assault and battery, but, you got to let me go.
Yep.
Now, if you still keep her and she's 25, or whatever age of an adult, then you're committing assault and battery. And so I'm sure Vinay and I agree on this. It's just I'm elaborating on his a very important point. I wanted to mention another situation where there's a seeming contradiction, and that is there was this movie, Dr. Strangelove. And in Dr. Strangelove, the situation was that we have to call the president to save the world. And if we don't call the president, there'll be ICBMs going here and there, and we'll all die. But we don't have a dime. This is before cell phones. However, there's a Coke machine, and it's got a lot of dimes in there. And one character in Dr. Strangelove is about to take his rifle and shoot the Coke machine to get the dime to save the world. And somebody else says, and this is an attempt to undermine our philosophy, says, oh, you can't do that. That's private property. That's theft. So to go a little deeper into the non-aggression principle, it's not saying you should never violate the NAP. It just says that if you do, you are a criminal and you have to pay the penalty. And if the Coke machine if the Coke people said, well, you ruined our machine and it's cost $300, well, you have to pay whatever the penalty is. So we're not saying you can't ever violate the non-aggression principle. We're just saying if you do, you're a criminal. Now, obviously, you're going to shoot the stupid machine to get the dime, to make the call to save the world. But this is an attempt to undermine the NAP. And I think we have to be more sophisticated about it. We're not saying never violate the NAP. We're saying if you do, you're a criminal, and you have to pay a certain penalty for being a criminal. You have to make recompense. And someone was talking about no jury would indict you. Well, no jury is going to give you more than a slap on the back of the hand for shooting the machine.
Well, we got an awful lot out of that first question, and I appreciate that. One of the most attractive things about our philosophy and this principle is that it's really simple. But is that all there is? I think Vinay started delving into that, and of course, Walter added the fact that we need property rights. We need as the foundation also. Now, are there, though, more basic principles that it rests on? And Vinay, you mentioned there has to be some principle that is universalizable, that is applicable to everybody. And of course, there are situations like the honesty principle, for instance, which is not a political principle, it's an ethical principle. And there are obvious situations, like you mentioned, the Kant situation, right? Where the killer's at the door and you lie your ass off in order to protect your daughter. You don't owe a killer the truth. I wonder if we're trying to get people to come on board, if we're forming a community or society, how do we get everyone to agree unless there is a shared understanding of this principle and maybe what lies underneath it? And there are people who are Buddhists, people who are Muslims, people who don't have any religious faith, Jewish, Christian, et cetera, and they may agree in principle that we want a law against murder, but they might not even agree about what murder is. And if we can get them to agree to as many things as possible, like what theft is, what rape is, and so on, and that this is just simply, you don't do this. How in the world do we get people to understand what they are agreeing to in forming a community? And a part of that also is how do you bring up your kids? How do you teach them civics? I think that's what we used to call it back in the 50 or 60 years ago. I don't know what they call it now, if they even have a name for it, or if they even teach it. But what practical ways, Walter, I want to start with you again on this. What practical ways are there that you can think of for getting everybody in line with the principles of the community or of the larger political body or whatever?
Well, we really have two questions on the table. One is, how do we get agreement among the most people possible? And the second one is, well, what underlies the NAP and private property rights? What justifies them?
Yeah.
And as for getting people to agree, first we have to get places like Harvard and Columbia to pass the Sodom and Gomorrah test. What's the Sodom and Gomorrah test? God was going to smite Sodom and Gomorrah because they were evil, and an angel pleaded with God, let me go there and find 10 righteous people, and then you'll save the place. And God agreed. He went there. He couldn't find 10 righteous people. Well, Harvard has got, 23 or 3,200 professors. I forget which number, something like that. Can you find 10 professors out of the 2,300 who are either conservative or libertarian? No. Well, how are you going to get people to agree if they've never even heard of an alternative, a much better alternative than the Marxist nonsense that they teach there? So one way to get people to agree is to allow what is it? Not skin color diversity, but ideology diversity. And too many of our universities just don't have it. Another problem is I once wrote a paper on sociobiology, which is the theory of why we behave the way we are based on genetics a million years ago. And I think that look, what percentage of the votes do the libertarians get? In the US, 2%, give or take. So it's going to be hard to get people not only to agree, but to agree to libertarianism. I don't want them to all agree on Marxism. I want them to agree on libertarianism. So
Right.
we have biological impediments there. So that's one answer to one question. Now the other question is, well, what sort of justifies the NAP and private property rights in the first place? What justifies libertarianism? And there are various theories. One is religion. God said so. I wish God would speak louder, but that's one possibility. Ayn Rand, what is she? It comes from A equals A. Don't ask. I don't know. But that's her view. Another one is natural law, natural rights. Many philosophers use that. My own favorite is my old buddy Hans Hoppe, who had this theory called, what was it? The argument from argument, or argumentation ethics. And he said, look, the only way to get to the truth is to argue, to discuss. If you and I are having a dispute and I shoot you, well, I didn't really win the argument because I didn't argue. And then he asked, well, what do you need in order to have an argument? Well, first, you need the non-aggression principle. Namely, you can't shoot your arguing person. And then you need a place to sit or to stand. And now you have private property rights. And now I'm only giving a 30-second view of this, but I think it's brilliant and creative. And that's my favorite justification of the NAP. However, just speaking for myself, I'm not that interested in what causes or what justifies the NAP. I'm much more interested in what follows from it. What can we deduce from it? And we can deduce, well, should we have legalized prostitution? Or should we have labor unions? Or should we have minimum wage? Or should we have free trade or tariffs? I'm more interested in the implications of it. But since you ask what justifies it, there are 4 or 5 different theories out there, and my favorite is Hans Hoppe's.
Yeah. Vinay, what's your take on this?
Okay. I'm going to have, apologies, a slightly expansive answer because I think I got bypassed on the couple of other questions before. One was, I have a slight disagreement with Walter Block. Is that each and every case of violation of NAP doesn't actually and shouldn't make you a criminal. The case of the woman jumping over the bridge, suppose she was 18 and in the hypothetical she is perfectly healthy, not stage 5 cancer or anything. Yes, you have aggressed against her, but like I said, even if she tries to sue you, no jury would convict you. But normally it's a principle in law. It's just all about the sort of the greater good. I hate the term greater good, but there is a compelling reason for your action, and it is to the benefit of the woman who was saved. So that's the first thing. The second thing was you asked about deceit and subtle manipulation. Now, the definition of aggression that I gave already had the avoidance of deceit. So fraud is just another form of deceit. But subtle manipulation is a very strange thing. And sometimes when you don't proffer something in a conversation, is that subtle manipulation? Yes. Is it okay? I would say in a business negotiation, it is okay not to show all your cards because it is a business negotiation. I mean, in Asia, everybody haggles with the street hawkers, and the hawkers know it. They also start with a higher price than they're willing to take, and you start with a lower price than you're willing to pay. But if you have a strong friendship with someone, it is best to proffer and be very, very open as you can be. Now, coming back to, where does NAP come from? I think we answered that question already, which is that there's metaphysics, the nature of the world around us. There's the ontology, our nature. And the questions we asked were, could a system be devised that primarily informs us as to what we ought to do with ourselves? A system not mainly containing rules of conduct, but of how we deal with others. And that principle, that system does have to be founded as a base of it is the NAP. And it's not a complete system just if it is based on that, but once you have the metaphysics and ontology in place, then you can go towards the full system.
I'd like to pipe up on this. I don't like 15-year-old girls, and I don't like 18-year-old girls, because 18 is right on the verge of child. Let's talk about a man who's 40 years old, and he's in perfect health, and he wants to commit suicide by jumping off a bridge. Would it be justified to grab him and not allow him to do that? And I'm not sure what Vinay's view is, but my view is it would not be justified to do that. I mean, maybe it's justified to do it for 5 minutes and say, "Are you sure you want to do that?" But you got to let him go, because he is the owner of his body. So, do we agree on that, Vinay?
Yes, we do. I mean, if you grab his arm and try to persuade him, and he's not easily persuaded, then at some point you got to let him go. But if I was a juror and the person didn't let him go, I wouldn't convict him of assault and battery if all he did was hold that person back, maybe for half an hour, maybe till he calms down. Because at the end of the day, someone who absolutely wants to end his or her life, they're going to succeed anyway.
Yeah, well, I think we agree. As long as you can talk to him for a half hour. I don't know what the number is, 20 minutes, an hour, who knows? But after that, it becomes assault and battery.
Yes, yeah. At some point you got to let go. But if it's an emergency, or you don't even know the person, it's a stranger. You don't know exactly what her age is. She's got one leg over the bridge, and you run and grab her. Maybe you injure her foot, but so what? Yeah.
Oh, okay. I have to break in here because this is not a discussion of suicide. And we spent almost half an hour circling the question of suicide. And I apologize also to both of you and to the audience. We got so much juice out of the first question that I put questions 2 and 3 together, as I'm sure you noticed. And I'd like to move on now. Walter suggested that we look at policy implications, because that's really kind of interesting. What are the implications of the NAP? And Vinay, I'd like to go to you about what are the minimum additional principles or sub principles of the NAP to deal with some of the really persistent social challenges we have, like we've got declining birth rates across a lot of the Western world. We've got uncontrolled migration in quite a bit of the Western world. We have non-traditional domestic arrangements, and we've also talked in the past about children's well-being. And so, is the non-aggression principle sufficient to protect individual rights and liberty in these kinds of areas of concern, or do we need some additional just to expand upon the principle, or do we need additional principles as well? So go ahead, Vinay, and give us your thoughts.
Thank you. I mean, firstly, you said, how do we get the message across? And normally you would get it across in law. So the founding principle of jurisprudence would be non-aggression. But it would not be enough. As we discussed in the other podcasts, in immigration, in foreign policy, we had to go to have NAP and something else. I mean, for instance, if there is an immigrant who, is not being aggressive at all he wants to do is come and find a place to live, seek a job. He's been offered a job by an employer. So he'll be able to live a very peaceful and productive life. And yet we find that, we are in favor of the government putting restrictions on such an individual because we have some aggregate numbers that we can't take 30 million every year into the US or something like that. And that prevents some people from simply applying for a job, getting it, and coming there. So we had to go beyond NAB in just drafting an immigration policy, unless it was open borders. Even if it was open borders with no welfare can be received for 10 or 15 years, even if that is the case, you're still gone beyond that. Also, for foreign policy, you had to sort of say, well, who are our friends and who do we cultivate as friends? Which nations are our friends? How do we respond to an imminent threat? So these are nuances that cannot automatically be addressed by NAP, but can be addressed by the bigger principles. What is the nature of human beings? What do they seek? What are their needs? I mean, one need is respect from others, and one way to get respect from others is to make yourself tremendously productive. And the another way is to get power, like politicians do, and get power over other people's lives, legal power to commit aggression. And unfortunately, because that's inherent in human nature, we have this difficulty of getting around to a society in which non-aggression becomes a cornerstone right, or a cornerstone principle, rather. That's all I have for now on this.
Okay, Walter.
I'm not sure I go along fully with what Vinay said about respect. You have to be productive. Bernie Sanders, my old high school track team buddy, used to inveigh against millionaires and billionaires. He no longer does that. He now just inveighs against billionaires. You know why? He's now a millionaire. Now, look, there are two ways to become a billionaire. One is to steal it, whether with a gun or through politics, and the other is to create a great product and benefit humanity. And a lot of people hate billionaires, so they don't give them respect, even though they earn their money honestly, unfortunately. I also wanted to talk a little bit about criticisms of what we're now talking about. One of them is triple L, live and let live. I don't think live and let live follows from libertarianism, because let's say I hate, people with hair. I don't have any hair anymore. I just hate people with hair. And I have a restaurant and I say, no people with hair, no men with hair can come in. Only bald men and women. Do I have a right to do that? Do I have a right to discriminate not only against bald people or haired people, but gays or women or blacks or Jews? Yeah, sure. Now this sounds horrible, but you're going to hurt the poor victimized group. But there are three people I would mention who have done more than any other three people in demonstrating that this right to discriminate will not hurt the victim. And these people are Gary Becker, Thomas Sowell, and Walter Williams. And they've shown over and over and again that if you discriminate against someone, well, then their wage falls. But if their wage falls, you can make more profit by hiring them. So the whole thing doesn't work. But the point is that bigotry and hatred on the basis of sex or race or sexual preference is a right. So we don't necessarily favor. I favor it, but you don't have to favor it as a libertarian. I wanted to mention another one, and that is sometimes somebody's not breathing, and a doctor, what he does is he cuts his throat in order to help him breathe. That's not assault and battery, even though it looks like assault and battery, because as Vinay was indicating, this was an attempt to help the guy, not to hurt the guy. I wanted to mention one other, and that is the two more points. One is I'm on the 25th floor, and I lean over my balcony and I fall, and happily Roger has an apartment on the 15th floor, and he's got a nice big flagpole. And I grab the flagpole and I'm starting to move down the flagpole. What I want to do is to go into Roger's house, his apartment, and then get on the elevator and get back up to my house on the 25th floor. But Roger says no, and it's his private property. And our hearts go out to me because I'm innocent and I want to just get back to my house. And Roger says, if you move one more step toward me, I'm going to shoot you. And now the critics of libertarianism, what they say is, would you drop? No, I'm not going to drop. I'm going to keep going, and hopefully, I'll bluff him. I'll engage in deceit and fraud, and hope he won't shoot me. And then, well, one argument against libertarianism and private property. I mean, he owns the flagpole. One argument against this is that I'll die and I'm innocent, and that sounds horrible. My answer to this is, how many people will die if, I mean, this is a pretty rare case. How many people will, okay, I'm going to die, but more people will die if we don't respect private property rights. So it sounds horrible that I'm going to die because Roger is a rotten kid and he won't let me into his apartment. Look, I might have, I don't know, beat up somebody looking like me might have beat Roger up and he was afraid of me. He has every right to shoot me. So that would be one case. And I also want to talk a little bit about immigration since it was raised. My view is open borders, completely open borders. Now, look, you people, idiots, think that new babies come from sexual intercourse. You're just wrong. You're fools to believe that. Where do new babies come from? They come from the stork. The stork brings new babies with a blue blanket, it's a boy. With a pink blanket, it's a girl. Well, where does the stork get the babies from? From the country Storkovia. So, if you're really against open borders, you have to have population control like they did in China. You're only allowed to have one kid or maybe not no kids because babies are immigrants from the country called Storkovia. So we have to have open borders. Now, from the libertarian point of view. Now, the problem with that is some of the immigrants are murderers and rapists, and we don't want them. So the answer, I think the libertarian answer is, let's privatize every square inch of the country. Not only the land, but the water, everything. No more parks, no more roads, government owned. Everything is privately owned. And now you want to invite somebody from, I don't know, Mars. Not to pick any country. You want to invite somebody from Mars. Well, if you invite somebody from Mars into our country, you have to be responsible for them. If they commit a crime, we're going to come get you for inviting them. And not only are you responsible, how do they get out of your house? Well, they have to get on a road. Well, then the road owner has to agree to accept them to be on the road. So what I'm trying to do is have our cake and eat it too. On the one hand, open borders. On the other hand, we have to protect ourselves against maniac immigrants. And I think this is the way to have our cake and eat it. We can not see too many libertarians want to jettison libertarian theory, like Hans Hoppe, for example. He wants to have a limited, he doesn't want to have open borders. But I think he gets in trouble with the Storkovia example. And also, he's jettisoning libertarianism in order to gain utilitarianism. Pragmatic implications are we don't want people who are murderers and rapists and other people like that. So I think we have the correct implication of the non-aggression principle for immigration is open borders and privatize everything. And you're responsible if you invite a Martian or somebody from somewhere else.
See. Well, Vinay, do you want to come back on any of that?
Yes, on one matter, I was going to just take the example of a fellow called Alexander the Great. And at the age of 16, he led his troops into combat. And, well, supposedly he achieved a lot of great things in his teenage years. Now, from a non-aggression point of view, he was an invader and he didn't achieve great things, right? He also had the advantage of being privately tutored by one of the greatest, if not the greatest. Aristotle was his tutor from age 13 to 16. Ethics, politics, and another thing called heuristics, which I had to look up. It's the art of debating or something. So what we have done is created a society in which we have said, oh, adults are age 18 and the mental maturity of people is not complete until they are in their late 20s. If you look back on your own lives, almost everybody says, sure, I was more mature at 30 than at 20, but they also say I was more mature at 40 than at 30 and at 50 than at 40, and it goes on and on. So does it mean we should just keep treating everyone like a child until they reach 65 years of age and then they retire? So nobody works. So I think we have significantly underestimated human beings and made the education system extremely long, extremely rigid. Everybody's got to learn algebra and geometry in high school instead of finding their path and get onto the workforce at age 15, 16. So, and on the basis again of, the ideal sort of law non-aggression is built into that. But, I had a co-author, Walter Donway, and we wrote a book in which it's called Media Wars, but the subtitle of the book is more explanatory because it says the battle to shape our minds. And that battle is on. And I reject the notion that we all have to be led by the government and their experts, and we have to be mollycoddled. I think the more freedom we grant ourselves and our children, the more productive we can all be, the more happy we can all be, and the more self-actualized we can all be.
Yeah, for sure. I think going back to Alexander the Great, I think one of the problems really was that he was too ambitious. If he'd simply tried to be Alexander the Pretty Good, I think everything would have turned out a lot better. Okay, Walter, the next question, I want to start with you. Um, the whole issue of addressing injustices to your rights and property, I'm sure I know what you're going to say, but not exactly how you're going to say it because you're always very interesting. Uh, Suppose you don't want to provide compensation or restitution to someone after you've caused them harm. Or in a parallel issue, suppose you feel like, well, yeah, I signed the contract to buy this car, but I really don't feel like making the payments. Isn't that a form of aggression? And if it is, explain how it connects to the non-aggression principle, or if it's in sort of a auxiliary principle, kind of connected in the best you can. Go ahead.
Well, I certainly agree with you that if you buy a car and you're supposed to be making the payments and you make 2 or 3 payments, and all of a sudden you say, well, this is getting boring. I don't want to make more payments. Well, then the owner of the car or the previous owner of the car should be able to repossess it from you. And you should be paying a penalty based on what the contract says. And if the contract doesn't say anything, well, then we have to intuit what the non-aggression principle would say. And my own theory of punishment is fourfold. First of all, I get, the Bible says a tooth for a tooth, an eye for an eye. I say 2 teeth for a tooth. So I'm going to steal your car, or I'll steal your pen because I can wave it around. I steal your pen, and now you capture me. Well, the first thing, I have to give back the pen. It's your pen. The second thing is what I just did to you should be done to me. Namely, you should get another pen of mine. Here's another pen of mine, and you should get the second pen. So that's 2 teeth for a tooth. The third one is if I immediately after stealing your pen went to the police station and said, I don't know what came over me, I was crazy, here's the pen back, then there are no costs of capture. On the other hand, if I hide out for 5 years and you guys are trying to find me, well, who's going to pay for all of that? Me. Fourth, and this is the most controversial, when I stole your pen, I scared you. I don't care if you're Arnold Schwarzenegger or Muhammad Ali and you fear nothing. I scared you objectively. Well, you have to scare me. Now, one way to scare me is go, nah. Another way to scare me is a little Russian roulette with the number of chambers and the number of bullets and the place where, is it here or is it the tip of my finger? So it's a very draconian punishment theory. So don't violate the non-aggression principle if my views on punishment theory are implicated. I wanted to mention something else on this. How about reparations?
Sure.
Now, there was slavery in the U.S., and this was a horrible thing, much worse than just stealing labor, although stealing labor was a part of it. So what did happen in 1865 when slavery was ended? What should have happened is that the slave masters should have been enslaved to the ex-slaves. Got it? Now, it's not a white or a black thing because there were black slave owners. I don't think there were any white slaves, but there were black slave owners. So it's not a white or a black thing, but most of the slaves were blacks, and most of the slaves were black, and most of the masters were white. So what should have happened is that the masters should have become slaves to the ex-slaves. Now, what about the plantation? Well, who put their labor into the plantation? John Locke and homesteaded. Who homesteaded that plantation? Well, it wasn't the white guy. He was just there with a whip, whipping the slaves. It was the slaves, so they should own that. Now, suppose that there's a plantation and there are 10 slaves. Well, each slave should get 1/10 of the plantation. It doesn't have to be the same square footage because, this meadow is better than that meadow. So the poorer meadow should get more land, but that's a minor deal. Okay, well, it's now, 150 years later. Should we have reparations for slaves? And there are two groups, the right wing, the left wing, and us libertarians, or at least my view. The right wing says, look, I never had a slave. There's no slavery nowadays, so there's no reparations whatsoever. The left wing says, yes, all whites owe all blacks for reparations. My people, I'm Jewish, we came here, my grandfather, 1895, something like that, 1902, long after slavery. Why are we paying anything? And then there are black people who just came over to this country 2 years ago. Why should they get any money for slavery in the U.S.? So I think that's a inoperable.
Yeah.
The correct view is that if there's some black guy in Harlem who says, look, I can prove that my great-grandfather was on Jones's plantation, and right now Jones's plantation is owned by Jones's great-grandson, who is innocent. He's just the recipient of he's holding stolen property because that property really belongs to Jones, to the slave's great-grandson. Now, possession is 9/10 of the law. Vinay is into the law, and I'm sure he'll agree with this, that the burden of proof is always on the plaintiff. So the black grandson has to prove that his great-grandfather was on the plantation, and we assume that the grandfather would have given it to the father and would have given it to the son. And if he can prove this, then he should get 1/10 of that plantation. Now, the problem with that is a thing called statutes of limitations. Statute of limitations says, look, after 50 years or 100 years or whatever it says, forget about it. Property is the way it is, and we're not going to change it. And I say that that's not fair. That's not proper. That's not libertarian. There is such a thing as a natural statute of limitations, namely, the further back you go in history, the harder it is to prove anything. But if this black young man in Harlem can prove that his great-grandfather was there and working on the plantation, I think he should get it. So the proper libertarian view is not all reparations from all whites to all blacks, and not none, but whenever you can prove it, you got it.
Sure. Vinay, you might have something to say about a different aspect of reparations or restitution and so on, but I'd like to, while we're talking about the Civil War, and I know this wasn't your country's Civil War, but I know that hundreds of thousands of men from the North and from the South were drafted into the militaries of the two countries, and they were sent, many of the draftees were sent to their deaths. Now, you can say, and it is true, that slavery is a terrible thing, but I would submit that the draft is selective slavery, and that's what we always called it in the 60s. We call it selective slavery. Some had to go, and some were sent to their deaths, and they had no choice unless they wanted to run away from their country, go to Canada. So do you see any, well, I don't know, maybe reparation to the people who died in the Civil War, their descendants would be even harder than reparation to slave descendants. But go ahead and comment on this or any other aspect of restitution that you'd like to comment on.
Okay. Firstly, I guess this illustration, which is quite complex, both the one that Walter talked about, and you did, there are historic wrongs, and in some cases it is awfully hard. Even if we didn't have the statute of limitations, it is tremendously hard to ascertain the facts, because everyone will say, oh yeah, my great grandfather was a slave, and how do you prove it, and what was their productivity, where were they a slave. Now the draftee situation may be slightly easier to establish an ancestor who was killed in the war, but if we go back a couple of 100 years, then there's going to be a lot of situations where the governments have aggressed against your ancestors. And then everybody deserves compensation. Where is the money going to come from? Well, it's the same everybody, the taxpayers, and then we're pretty much going to have bankruptcy. So at the sovereign level. So what I wanted to go back to the central issue about NAP. And if I'm engaged in a casual conversation with someone at the pub, or they're having a beer and they want to talk about libertarianism, they're sort of half serious. So it's nice as a conversation opener, because it's quite simple. But if they really want to dig into it, you want them to read Murray Rothbard, Walter Block's Defending the Indefensible or Undefendables, Ayn Rand, John Locke, and then have a 3-month or a 6-month period where you engage, and you still won't get all the answers. But NAP the shortcomings of NAP, I listed, last night I was looking at it, and I listed 10 things, right? First, as you mentioned, restitution. A crime's been committed by sending your great-grandfather's great-grandfather off to a war and he was killed. What's the right amount of compensation? We don't know just from NAP alone. We don't know the pathway to a libertarian utopia, howsoever defined. We don't know if we agree on a minimalist state, how exactly to get that taxation. There are some answers, but nothing that is perfect. We don't know about the right immigration levels, about foreign citizens' right to seek work, about the right of employers to employ foreign citizens without taking permission from the government. If you have a Rothbardian world that is effectively, you've manned it with independent jurists basing themselves on common law, if we did that today, you're going to find a lot of jurists that are corrupted by neo-Marxism. And it's going to be very hard to find the kind of jurists that Rothbard would rather have had. We don't have a theory of education, pedagogy, or the curriculum and customization. We don't have a theory of child rearing and the functioning of families. We don't have a theory of childhood. How can we all become Alexander the Great at age 16 without actually invading other lands? A couple of others, we don't have a theory for redemption. Roger and I attempted that as to what is the right amount of redemption and restitution in terms of you admit to having committed a moral wrong. We don't have the limits on the rights of governments to classify information as secret. By and large, they overdo it like nobody's business. And to make its disclosure an act of treason, it's punishable by death, which is kind of ridiculous.
Yeah. Guys, I have one more question, one more issue I wanted to delve into here, and I'm going to actually narrow it a bit because there's so much that could be said about it. I wanted to talk about property, but in particular, and I know this is very controversial, and so let's just explore a bit in our remaining time, the issue of intellectual property. Now, I know all three of us are writers. I'm a musician, and I've done recording musician work also and composing. So this is an issue of things that we have produced, created, and yet once it's out of your hands and the publisher has it, well, it's no longer a tangible object like your clothes washer, or your piano sitting in your living room or whatever. So or Vinay, I want to start with you. How does the NAP or homesteading or anything to do with I don't want to say actual, how does property extend to intellectual property, or does it? Go ahead, Vinay.
Okay.
Let me just say that we've only got 3 or 4 minutes, so we should both be brief.
Okay.
That's a Good point.
I
Go
will
ahead.
avoid the whole section of patents, which is very complex, but copyrights are much simpler than patents. And I absolutely believe that my reputation is part of my intellectual property. So I believe in the law of defamation, not correctly applied in the US, but I won't go into the details how. I absolutely believe that if you have a copyrighted work, Roger, and someone steals it and starts selling the books under their name, they cancel the name written by Roger Bissell or Walter Block, and they put their own name and start selling it at half the price. Yeah, absolutely. They're depriving Walter of royalties from his books. So that's my answer.
Well, that would be fraud, though. And fraud is already a no-no.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
copyright becomes an easier case than patents, limited
I see.
amount, limited time patents.
I see your point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Walter?
Well, Vinay and I only agree on 99% of everything, and this is in the 1%. I'm a big fan of Stefan Kinsella on this. I think he is the chief, my guru, my mentor on IP, intellectual property. I don't think that Vinay's reputation, he can't own his reputation. Well, that's defamation. That's different than IP. So we disagree on defamation also. I don't think that my reputation doesn't consist, I can't own it because it consists of your thoughts. So how can I own something that consists of your thoughts? So I think defamation law, libel and slander is non-libertarian. On IP, if you steal this pen, I no longer have this pen. If you steal my idea, I still have the idea. So what did you steal from me? And third, I wanted to mention, I think, Roger, you're guilty of what I call a typographical error when you said there was a civil war in 1861 in the U.S. The Civil War is when two armies each want to run the whole place. 1917 in Russia, Civil War. 1936 in Spain, Civil War. In 1861, it was not a civil war because the South didn't want to run the North wanted to run the South, but the South didn't want to run the North. The South just wanted to secede. Nor was it a war over slavery. My mentor on this is my old buddy Tom DiLorenzo, who quoted Lincoln as saying, "Look, I want to keep the country together." I'm putting words in Lincoln's mouth, a la Tom DiLorenzo. I want to keep the country together, and if keeping slavery will keep the country together, I'm going to keep slavery. If getting rid of slavery will keep the country safe together, I'll get rid of slavery. So it was not over slavery, it was over secession. And we libertarians believe in free association, namely you shouldn't be compelled to associate with anyone against your will. Well, Murray Rothbard favored two wars. One was the South in 1861, and the other was 1776 when the 13 colonies were trying to secede from UK.
Exactly right. Gentlemen, I enjoyed it very much. And in about 2 weeks, we'll get together for podcast number 5. I don't even remember what the topic is going to be. Or was this number 5? I think this might have been number 5. So we're on to number 6. Yay. Okay. And all you viewers out there, thanks for tuning in. And we'll see you again next time. And in the meantime, stay savvy.
I know what 6 will be. It'll be interesting.
Yes.
Thank you. And this is a pullover which I'm willing to sell for $100 to whoever. Yeah.
I'll pay it. Just send it over.
Done.
Take care.